Trailers are meant to get us hyped up for a game, and they're trying to coax you into pre-ordering and spending your money. But sometimes the advertising team gets a little too ahead of themselves, and they end up making a trailer that does not portray the product very well. As a matter of fact, the trailer really is nothing like the finished game that you get, and that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over my personal list of 10 trailers that were better than the game, and this was not a hard list to put together. We're going to kick things off with The Force Unleashed 2, one of the most disappointing Star Wars games of all time. The first Force Unleashed was a huge financial success to the companies and all of them involved, and they were quick to greenlight a sequel, but the sequel was famously rushed through development and extremely underwhelming. However, you wouldn't have known that by looking at the promotional material. There were a few trailers for The Force Unleashed 2, all of which made impressive use of CGI and showed Starkiller using the Force in some pretty insane ways, but the game itself was way less epic and way less interesting, and that's a good way to kick off this list. And speaking of disappointing Star Wars games, Star Wars Battlefront 2015. The reboot could have been so good. It could have been great, but unfortunately, it was also rushed through development in order to release alongside the Force Awakens movie. This led to tons of cut content, a whole gob, I say gob, of DLC in true EA fashion. But this did not stop the marketing team. Oh no, they had a field day. The trailers also made use of CG cutscenes and little splices of gameplay to make it look better than it actually was, and I guess to hold to the truth that yes, this is actual gameplay. A little tip for you guys. If a trailer is 90% CG and only 10% gameplay, chances are the game isn't going to be that good, and it's definitely not going to look like that. This month's giveaway is for a brand new PlayStation 4 console. All you have to do to enter is like the video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, turn on those notifications, and tweet me why you want to win it with your Twitter handle included. Assassin's Creed Unity. Now, Assassin's Creed definitely started getting stale around the early 2010s, which eventually led to Ubisoft needing to put the whole series on hold to rework it into the RPG series that we know today. But the point in which Ubisoft really decided that the AC series needed to be reworked was after the release of Unity. Unity was heavily promoted, once again, with CG cutscenes for the majority of its marketing, and then, when it finally came out, it was extremely buggy and needed extensive patching to even be playable for people that bought it. Unity put a serious dent in the franchise's rep, and a couple years later, Ubisoft announced they were putting it on hold until AC Origins. At number 7, No Man's Sky. I mean, yes, it's going to be on here, but No Man's Sky disappointment didn't stop with the trailers. It was the interviews with the devs as well. Throughout all of No Man's Sky's marketing, we were constantly shown gameplay segments that they didn't exist. They weren't there. We were told about features. They didn't exist either. They weren't there. When launch day came around, we found out that all the lies we had been told were true. The devs, they went radio silent. No Man's Sky was super damaging to the public's reputation of video game hype as a whole, as it was a perfect example of what companies can get away with now through marketing. It doesn't matter what's in the game. The only thing that matters is how many copies are sold. Now, I will say, No Man's Sky is in a much better place now, I get that, but that does not take away from the fact that they were super shady in the beginning. Dead Island. Now, Dead Island was a pretty underwhelming game overall, but it's gone down in history for having one of the best cinematic trailers of all time. I'm sure you've seen it. You watched the horrific zombie attack on an island resort in reverse as some dramatic music played in the background, and you saw how beautiful this place was before the outbreak. Gamers, everybody was excited. It was emotional, story-driven zombie game, since that's what the trailer portrayed, right? But when the game actually came out, it was really nothing more than a generic first-person zombie survival game with a bunch of bugs and a story that was nowhere near as emotional or driven or effective as that trailer was. When the trailer for a game provokes more emotion than the actual game itself, you know something has gone seriously wrong. Cracking into the top 5. Rainbow Six Siege. Now let me be super clear here. I'm not talking about Siege in its current state, because the current state of Siege is good. But a lot of people tend to forget that when Siege came out, it was actually a huge disappointment. Much of that was due to the pretty dishonest gameplay trailers that Ubisoft had released leading up to the launch day. Ubisoft has a history of downgrading their games from reveal to launch day, and Siege was no exception to this. The early gameplay footage showed off much better graphics than what was actually shipped with the game, and it allowed you to interact with the map and with the hostages in ways that you couldn't actually do on launch day. It was very underwhelming, and many people on day one weren't happy, but there were people that stuck with it, and Ubisoft stuck with it as well, and now it is one of the best shooters on the market with a massive following. But it takes me back to what I said earlier. Why can't it be that way on day one? Watch Dogs. Speaking of Ubisoft downgrades, let's talk about the most infamous one of them all. Watch Dogs was promoted to be kind of futuristic, high-tech, maybe a version of Grand Theft Auto, and much of that was thanks to the very impressive reveal trailer showing off a dynamic and interactive world full of NPCs, detailed weather effects, great graphics, you name it, it had it. But when the game came out, hardly any of that was actually there. Watch Dogs was just another average-looking open-world crime game, and I'm sure you've all seen that video that puts the gameplay and the reveal trailer side by side to show off all the downgrades. The exact reasoning for these downgrades was never officially revealed by Ubisoft, although the most common theory is that the reveal trailer was recorded on the PC version, but then the game that had to be scaled back so it would run better on consoles. And then they also scaled back the PC version so it wouldn't be superior to the console version. Overall, just a super shady move, and it was definitely their most infamous example of downgrading. At number 3, Anthem. There has been so much controversy surrounding Anthem, and you know what? It's pretty much deserved. But one of the biggest controversies that's sprung up over the last few months has to do with the discovery that the reveal gameplay of Anthem, the one that had the players flying around the map while dropping in and out of the mission, had been completely fabricated. Due to the extremely troubled development of the game was still in pre-production at the time of that trailer's airing during E3, and according to reports, many of the game's developers hadn't even seen the trailer because it wasn't actual gameplay. It was completely faked. Anthem has had a lot of negative press on its plate ever since launch day, and this just made things worse because honestly, the game shown in that fake trailer, well, of course, it looked way better than the one we ended up getting, and I just don't get it. Why can't developers and publishers, mainly publishers, just be honest with the gamers? At number 2, Destiny. Does anybody remember all the trailers leading up to the release of the very first Destiny that were full of energy, explosions, super interesting world? Yay! And then when the game came out, it was bland. It was a repetitive looter shooter with a horrible story and a super unrealized universe, and hardly any canon and any backstory. Destiny was one of the most expensive games ever made at the time, and much of that budget was used for an aggressive and admittedly well-done marketing campaign featuring both CG and live-action trailers and commercials. And hype, of course, was through the roof for the game to come out, but unfortunately, that was a big part of the reason why the game was such a big disappointment. The game advertised just was really not there. Now, I'm not saying Destiny 1's marketing was false advertising, but it was definitely not clearly as creative or exciting as the marketing made it out to be. And maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe that means the marketing was successful and they did exactly what they wanted to do because they got people hyped. I just don't think that when the correlation and connection to the marketing doesn't fit with the actual product, that it's right. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to drop a like on the video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel with post notifications on so you always get alerted when a new video goes up and you can get that elusive first comment. And speaking of not being right, Aliens, Colonial Marines. Easily the most infamous example of a trailer being better than the game. This was a sci-fi horror FPS developed by Gearbox and published by Sega to be the sequel to the James Cameron movie Aliens. You played as the Marines from the movie. You went back to inspect a distress call from one of the movie's characters, and you ended up facing off with the dreaded xenomorphs. And early footage of the game, man, it looked amazing. Impressive visuals, great animations and lighting, and interesting weapons, and showing off a game that perfectly blended action and the horror the way the movie did. But on launch day, fans were pissed. It was a bait and switch. The game we got was not only insanely downgraded from the trailers, but it was almost a completely different game altogether. It was ugly, it was repetitive, it was poorly written, buggy, short, and there were tons of features and weapons shown off in the trailers. They just weren't there. Gearbox never gave an actual reason for the bait and switch or why the game was so dramatically downgraded without telling anyone, but there are tons of theories that you can go look into for yourself because it's actually pretty interesting stuff. But perhaps the worst part of the whole thing is that the Gearbox CEO, Randy Pitchford, to this day, refuses to give a straight answer on what happened to Aliens. And he said in interviews that he thinks it's actually a good game that was just graded too harshly. You've got to be kidding me. If you played this game, you know that's not true. And there you have it. 10 games with trailers that were way better than the end product. It's always a bummer when a game is a disappointment, but it seems it's becoming more and more common for trailers to be super unrepresentative of the actual game they're promoting. And personally, I hope some new law gets written that makes it harder for companies to get away with this because it's becoming more and more frequent. Or get these companies on the same page and launch these games complete and ready to go. You guys let me know in the comments which game you're thinking should have been on this list that didn't make it, and I'll see you next time.